Greetings. My name is Dr. Waddell Brooks, Sr., your host, and this is Community Focus. Ladies and gentlemen, we have an outstanding person, a person that you should know, Attorney Angela Cunningham, attorney at law, Kenosha, Wisconsin. Good morning, Attorney Cunningham.
Good morning, Dr. Brooks.
We're very happy that you've literally taken time from your busy schedule to be with us on Community Focus to let Lake County know who you are. By the way, Lake County is approximately 850,000 people, but I don't know how many people up at 5 o'clock this Sunday morning to listen to the program, but I understand we have a pretty good audience. And you're in Kenosha, Wisconsin, so it airs in Kenosha also on 102.3 FM. Well, we're going to start off by letting you tell our listening audience a little bit about your personal and professional background.
Well, as you mentioned, I'm an attorney. Currently have my own law office, ADC Law Office in Kenosha. It's just myself and a part-time assistant right now. I've been doing that I actually just opened my law office back in February. Mm-hmm. I previously worked for the district attorney's office up in Milwaukee, prosecuting various crimes from domestic abuse crimes to general crimes and also failure to pay child support. Prior to that, I did some family law and worked in nonprofit, including with Legal Action of Wisconsin and the Milwaukee County, the Milwaukee Justice Center in Milwaukee County as well. I've been a lawyer for about, I was sworn into the bar in 2013. I graduated law school in 2012. Prior to law school, I worked in social services. Also have a master's in social work. So I was the executive director of a nonprofit immediately before going to law school. Mm-hmm. And so that's just a little bit. I have a mix of social service background, which I use in my legal practice as well.
I have to let the audience know that you got your beginning at Tots and Toddlers Daycare Center in North Chicago, right? You graduated from kindergarten?
I sure did. Yes, I did.
I'm not so sure whether your parents have the red and cap and gown, though.
You know, my mom looked for it, but she couldn't find it. But she has so much in storage that I'm sure it may be there somewhere. But okay. She wasn't able to locate it immediately.
Right. Okay, I just want to let our listening audience know that we air in Kenosha, Wisconsin, so the Kenosha family will be listening to have an opportunity to listen to the program also. Attorney Cunningham, what piqued your interest in the legal profession?
So as I mentioned, I was working in social services before I went to law school. Actually, Let me back up even before that.
Okay.
Once upon a time, you know, when you're a kid and people ask you what you want to do, I said I wanted to be a lawyer.
Oh.
But sometime between me saying I wanted to be a lawyer and me actually going to college, that dream of becoming a lawyer somehow got lost. So I took a different route. Mm-hmm. But after I was working in social services, especially at my last job before I went to law school, I worked in kind of a grassroots faith-based organization where a lot of the clients that we worked with were low income. A lot of them were homeless. And upon speaking with them, and they would come in, we provided all kinds of services. We provided food, we provided clothing, closet, personal care items, and it was kind of a community center setup so people could come, sit down, and talk. And we really got to know a lot of the clients who frequented the center. Mm-hmm. So as I'm speaking with clients, I learned that a lot of them had legal issues that would come up, from evictions to family law issues to consumer law issues. And I saw how it really compounded their already difficult situations. And trying to find resources to help them with their legal matters was difficult. There was really only one agency that provided free legal services, and they were overwhelmed, as you can imagine, with the amount of people who had the need. And so it piqued my interest to get back to the law when I realized the huge need for the community to have affordable and accessible legal services. And so that's when I decided that I wanted to go to law school. And I started researching law schools, and I found out that Northwestern, which was right across the border, was experimenting with the 2-year accelerated JD program.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea behind that program was for career changers, which that definitely fit me because I was changing careers, to be able to get a law degree in 2 years instead of the typical 3 years. But rather than cutting the amount of credits that people took in the 2-year program, they just sped it up a little bit, meaning that we started in the summer instead of the fall. And instead of taking, around 15, 16 credits a semester, we took 17, 18 credits each semester in order to get to graduate earlier. So we ended up graduating with the same amount of credits, just in a condensed amount of time. And that really drew me to it because to be able to be done in 2 years versus 3,
Mm-hmm.
Especially with the career change, was wonderful for me. And so then I went ahead and did it.
Well, tell us a little bit about the steps recommended for high school students interested in pursuing a professional law career.
So law school is considered a postgraduate program. So
Okay.
before you can go to law school, you have to get a 4-year, a bachelor's degree.
Okay.
With that said, there's not really any specific bachelor's degree that's going to give you a leg up to get into law school.
Mm-hmm.
Unlike kind of like medical school, they tell you should take biology or chemistry if you want to go to medical school. But in law school, it's your undergraduate degree almost doesn't matter as much. But once you get your bachelor's degree, if you decide you want to go to law school, then for most law schools, you have to take an entrance exam called the LSAT. As LSAT, law school. You know what? I'm not sure what it stands for, but
Okay.
the LSAT, LSAT, and it's mostly a test of logic because lawyers do a lot of logic when as part of our work when examining case law and applying law to the facts of any particular case that we're working with at the time. So you got to take the LSAT. And then also, I say research schools. There's all different types of schools out there, and they have all different types of requirement. Look at your undergraduate grades is important. So the higher your GPA, the better your chances of getting into a top-tier school. Of course, look at your LSAT score. So when researching schools, you want to look at your GPA, look at your LSAT score as determining which schools you think you can get into. Apply for scholarships if available. There's not as much money available for law school as there is in undergrad, but it exists. And again, your undergraduate grades and your LSAT score make a big difference in access to money when it comes to law school.
Well, tell us about the criteria required for high school students interested in the legal profession. You did mention about the going into medical and other fields. It may be different, but I had a laundry list here, and you may comment on some of these, and like reading, writing, literature, speaking, which you're doing an outstanding job now, speaking.
Thank you.
A researcher and knowledge of the U.S. Constitution, expertise and application of law, and I guess the laundry list goes on. But I'd like for you to comment on the importance of some of these, reading, writing, literature, speaking, research, and so forth.
Absolutely. So lawyers read a lot. So you have to be able to, you have to like to read, and you have to be good at reading comprehension. So not just being able to read the words on the page, but understand what it's saying.
Okay.
Are very, very important. Also, knowing about the basic government setup and constitution and how they all play together would give you a leg up definitely once you get to law school. You do learn that more in depth when you're in law school, but knowing how the law and the judicial system maybe works with other areas of government is important. Again, just having the best grades you can get is really important. You have to be somebody who doesn't like school is not going to like law school. Somebody who doesn't like to study or work hard is not going to like law school. And even if you're somebody who's smart and was able to get through high school without doing much studying or reading, I can guarantee you that once you get to law school, you're going to have to do a lot of studying and reading to get through law school. So I think those are really, really important. And learning good study habits while you're in high school will get you the good grades in college, which will help you soar once you get to high school.
I mentioned about speaking, but it would be helpful to be on a debate team or some courses where you utilize your speaking knowledge, right? Speaking talents. Or
potentially. It depends on what type of lawyer you want to be. So there are all different types of lawyers out there. When people think of lawyers, they typically think of in the courtroom doing trials that you see on TV. But that's just one area. There's also what's called so we call that litigation when you're in court and things like that. But there's also transactional law where you're not in the courtroom at all. You're reviewing contracts, you're drafting contracts, you're making deals. So being able to communicate is really important, but you don't necessarily have to be in the debate team if that's an area that you want to go in, because you're not learning courtroom rules, you're not learning the rules of evidence, and things like that. You're negotiating, you're drafting contracts and reviewing documents, and a lot of lawyers have never stepped foot into a courtroom.
Oh, okay. Right. Attending a top law school in the country is a non-traditional student.
So I should mention that when I attended law school, by the time I went to law school, I was a single parent of a 10-year-old, which definitely made me non-traditional. Because I was in a program that had career changers. A lot of the people in my program were older and had families, but they weren't, single parent families. Law school is grueling. It's very grueling. And then I did it in 2 years. And I did it as a single parent. I think one thing that I want people to know is if you have a dream or a goal, don't let your circumstances stop you. Looking on paper at me, nobody would have thought a single parent of a 10-year-old would go to Northwestern, let alone a Northwestern law school, let alone get a law degree in years. But when you set a goal and make it a priority, then it's about balancing your time and organizing your time and setting that focus, and don't let anybody deter you. I had to make a lot of accommodations. Luckily I was able to connect with a woman who was actually a lawyer, who was an adjunct professor at the law school, who had a son who was the same age as my son. They became really good friends, and she was huge help for me when I was in law school. So I think one important thing to keep in mind is to make those connections. Find a community who can help support you. That's the only way I was able to get through, was because of that one attorney who basically took me and my son under her wing for the 2 years that we were there. And then also recognize that because you're a non-traditional student, you're going to do law school differently. A lot of my classmates, had study groups where they would get together and study late into the night to prepare for exams and things like that. I couldn't do that. I had a kid at home. I couldn't, go to these study groups after classes and sit there for hours on end to prepare for exams. I had to learn how to study by myself. And then when I did have time to get together with study groups, I had to learn how to maximize my time that I could when I could bounce out ideas off of classmates.
Well, what about the transition from law school to being a lawyer?
So and this I had to learn myself. So when you go to law school, people, they think about, okay, what it takes to get in law school. I got to take the LSAT. I got to have good grades. I got to fill out the law school application. And the other side of law school, which people don't talk about much, is that when you graduate law school, you're not automatically a lawyer.
Okay.
You actually have to take the bar exam,
Mm-hmm.
which is a very grueling test. It's a 2-day test, and just about every state requires it. Wisconsin is an outlier, which I'll explain to you in a second. But for most people, once you graduate law school, then you have to study for the bar exam for whatever state that you plan to practice in. And a lot of people take the bar exam practice courses, and they study full time for that exam. And I believe it's offered in like June or July after you graduate, probably July. Throughout the country, the exam is offered on the same day in every state. And people after law school, some people will pay for the bar exam course, which is $2,000 to $3,000. They study full time for the bar exam.
Okay.
I couldn't afford that. I had no idea that was going to be another kind of hurdle I had to come over, because I kind of knew about the bar exam, but I didn't know what it entailed to prepare for it. And so that was kind of a shock for me. I couldn't afford to just study full time. I needed to work because I had a kid. So I was working part time and studying. I bought the books, but I couldn't afford the prep course because I didn't have $2,000 or $3,000 to pay for the prep course. So I had the books and self-studied. But when you go to law school, you got to take that into consideration, that after you graduate, you're not a lawyer yet. You still have to take this exam, and the exam is grueling. It's a 2-day exam. The first day is multiple choice, and then the second day is an essay exam. So take that into consideration when planning kind of your career from law school to becoming a lawyer. Then in Wisconsin, I said I was going to talk about that later. So Wisconsin is the only state in the country that if you graduate from a Wisconsin law school, you do not have to take the bar exam. There's two law schools in Wisconsin, Marquette University Law School and then University of Wisconsin-Madison Law School. If you go to those law schools and you decide to stay in Wisconsin and practice, you do not have to take the bar exam. Wisconsin is the only state that does that. No other state does that. And then if you go to one of those schools and decide you want to practice somewhere else, for instance, if you went to Marquette and decide you want to practice in Illinois, then you'd still have to take the Illinois bar exam. I didn't know that, and if I had, maybe I possibly would have made different choices about what law school I was going to go to, because I always knew I was going to come back to Wisconsin to practice.
Right.
And so I could have easily went to Marquette University, which is right up the street from me, and not have to take the bar exam. But I feel like it was all worth it. It was all worth it, especially now, since if I do decide that I want to be licensed in another state, such as Illinois, I've taken the bar exam, and I can do the reciprocity agreement, whereas anybody else who graduated from a Wisconsin law school and didn't have to take the bar, if they decide they want to go to another state, they actually have to take the bar exam because they never took one. So that's a plus, I suppose.
Ladies and gentlemen, again, we're talking with Angela Cunningham, attorney at law in the state of Wisconsin, and she's promulgating information to us about the challenges that she faced in going into law school and to be a lawyer. Now, along with that, Attorney Cunningham, tell us about some things to consider in starting your own law practice.
So I always knew that I eventually wanted to have my own law practice.
Oh, okay.
I just wasn't sure how or when that was going to happen. There was a period where I was a little underemployed, that I started taking some private cases, but I was a very new attorney and didn't really have much confidence in myself. And then as soon as I got a job offer, I went and took that job offer right away. But most recently, I was commuting back and forth to Milwaukee, working at the Milwaukee District Attorney's Office. I don't know if you've driven up to Milwaukee recently on I-94, but there's construction. And it got to the point where I was getting very frustrated with the commute, especially with the construction, and the unpredictability of it, because if there was an accident, then all of a sudden it was taking me twice as long to get to the office. And I was working long hours. My caseload was ridiculous. And I just decided that it wasn't worth it. The pay versus how much I was working and the stress I was experiencing wasn't worth it. Also, that commute took me out of my community. I live in Kenosha. I liked being involved in the Kenosha community, and I couldn't do that as long as I was working in Milwaukee. So I just decided that I was going to start my own office. But I had to figure out how I was going to make that happen because I knew I needed some income while I built up my caseload. An opportunity presented itself where there was a part-time contract attorney position that opened up with child support services in Racine, which is the next city over from Kenosha. And so I applied for that, got that job, and that was a perfect opportunity for me to start building up my business. Once I made that initial leap, everything started running and falling into place. I connected and had lunch with a couple of attorneys that I knew in the Kenosha area just to get some ideas from them about where I should start and some ideas about what I should do. One of the attorneys that I had lunch with told me her and her husband owned an office building and they had office space. I wasn't even looking to rent office space right away. I was just planning on, meeting with clients at the courthouse or at their home if needed, but not having the expensive overhead office. However, that presented itself, and it's right by the courthouse, and I knew it wouldn't be available when I thought I would be ready to rent an office, so I took that leap of faith and rented the office space. I also started taking public defender appointments. I figured criminal law would be the easiest transition as far as what types of cases I would start off with because I was a prosecutor. So I was very familiar with criminal law and the criminal process, and there's an immediate opportunity to take public defender cases in Kenosha. So that's kind of how I started. Then I knew I needed to get my name out there, so I made a website. Started doing some marketing on social media, told all my friends, sent out an email blast letting them all know. And thankfully, I have a wonderful network of friends and family who, whenever they know somebody who needs a lawyer, they give me a call. Put an ad in local newspapers, and the calls just started coming in. Actually, I told you I took that part-time job at Racine Child Support Services. I was only there for 2 months because after a couple months, my caseload got to the point where I couldn't juggle both. So I was blessed in that I was able to get started so quickly. And I also quickly saw that the need for, especially in the minority community, a lawyer who people can go to about various topics. So I'm actually in the process of diversifying my practice from just doing kind of the criminal and child support stuff to being more of a general practitioner. Because I'm getting phone calls about all different types of things. So I'm slowly expanding that in that way, and I'm hoping that if I keep going and the trend that I'm going in, that I can, I see myself growing. I don't want to stay a solo practitioner. I see myself becoming more of a law office with a number of attorneys providing services in a number of areas, and I would love to make it an office of minority attorneys, if possible, with minority staff, because I think that's a huge needed resource in southeastern Wisconsin.
Well, I may say this, though. The reason that you have been successful and you have been meeting the challenges that you have faced, and I was going to address those maybe at another time. Maybe I will invite you to my television show sometime soon to talk about some of the challenges, the funding, how important location is, whether the individual or a partnership is, recommended, the budget for operations, the type of media that you're using, which you have touched upon. But there's a lot to be, and I just have to continually congratulate you on your passionate, and that's what I guess with any occupation you have to be passionate about what you're doing, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You have to really want it, and you have to, you have to be willing to put in the work.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're not passionate, once it gets hard, it's easy to quit.
Right.
But if you're passionate, keeps you going when the going gets rough. And it gets rough. I mean, I've talked about it, but, and I've probably oversimplified. I know I've oversimplified things, but
Okay.
it's your passion that keeps you going.
Yeah. Well, what about your ultimate goal? Where you like to be in another, well, we may say 5 years may be a short-term goal, but 10 years.
I would ultimately like to run for judge. I would like to be a judge. That's a goal of mine. And I've had several people encourage it and recommend it. And some people are asking me to do it sooner rather than later. I'm not there yet. But that is where I would like to end up and, God willing, maybe even retire from the bench.
This is fantastic. You mentioned family support and how important family support is, and another area may be church support too. Have you been active in your church?
I don't have a church home. I kind of jump from church to church.
Okay.
I haven't had a church home probably since grad school when I was up in Madison. But that is something that I'm constantly seeking, and hopefully we'll find sooner rather than later.
Now, community support. Have you been active in the community?
Absolutely. I'm part of several groups in the community, including a Lincoln Park Community Conversation, the Coalition for Dismantling Racism, and I definitely make it a top priority of mine to be actively involved in the community. I think that also adds to my success as a lawyer as well, because people know who I am. They've seen me around. They know my work. They know my commitment to what I do. And so I think community involvement is a huge aspect of making where you live a better place. But also, if you want to be an entrepreneur, people go with what they know.
Right. One last question I may just have you just touch upon. I know we could spend a whole program on it. Department of Professional Regulations concerning misconduct, professional liability insurance in this area. You want to touch upon the...
Are you talking about the
there's an agent.
Kind of
there's a department. Why is there necessary to have a Department of Professional Regulations?
So I'm guessing that the Wisconsin equivalent that you're talking about is the Board of I can't even think of it. Office of Lawyer Regulation.
Okay.
I'm guessing is the Wisconsin equivalent. So lawyers have an ethical standard that we have to abide by, and our ethical standard for the normal layperson doesn't make a lot of sense in a lot of places. Some are obvious common sense, but there's just certain rules that lawyers have to live by to ensure the integrity of the profession, but also to ensure that clients that we work with are getting, are treated with the utmost respect, and that they're, for lack of a better word, that they're not getting screwed. And so there is this governing board that makes sure that lawyers follow the ethical rules that are set out by the state standards. And any clients or even any other lawyers who see another lawyer who is not following those rules can report it to the Office of Lawyer Regulation. And then that body will investigate those allegations to determine whether or not somebody has not followed the rules.
Attorney, our time has run out. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been talking with Attorney Angela Cunningham, attorney at law of the ADC Law Office, LLC, Kenosha, Wisconsin. Thank you very much again, Attorney Cunningham, and we'll be talking with you soon.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Community Focus. My name is Dr. Waddell Brooks Sr., your host.